All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our panel today, discussion on EdTech and Ed investments in China. My name is Duke Liu. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and CEO of Rise Education and the CEO of the Edge Learning Centers. Today we have several great speakers who will kind of talk about their views on the investment space in Ed and EdTech. So actually I'll go ahead and start with, if you don't mind, LiHong. To be introduced. She's Managing Director of Bain Capital Private Equity China. Has been doing investments for over 25 years in the financial services and sector across U.S. and Asia Pacific. She's in charge of investments and portfolio management in China and sits on the Asia Committee for Bain Capital. Next one would be Alex Wu. He's Executive VP of Portfolio Management at Bain Capital Private Equity China. Joined Bain Capital in 2017, which is based in Hong Kong. Prior to Bain Capital Private Equity, he worked at PwC Consulting with a focus on the TMT industry and digital solutions across cloud, e-commerce, and analytics. Then we have Adil Hussain. He's founder and managing director of Emerging Strategy, a global market intelligence and advisory firm that specializes in the education sector. Adil's work spans the continuum of pre-K to 12 higher ed and the workforce, and his customers include many of the largest international education companies. And then we have Zhenyu Zhang. He's the CEO of Gymboree. Zhenyu graduated from MIT as a PhD in mechanical engineering and operations management. As a pioneer in the Chinese children's education industry, Dr. Zhang advocates the standardization and upgrade in early education industry in order to build a more scientific and happier environment for children and families worldwide. Meanwhile, Dr. Zhang himself devotes himself to research in the education management arena. In the past 3 years, Dr. Zhang has developed and taught a complete set of MBA courses for education professionals and investors. Thank you all for coming and talking with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and, if you don't mind, LiHong, start with you. And could you kind of explain how you and Bain Capital Private Equity China have approached education and EdTech investment in the region?
Yeah, for Bain Capital, we invest in late-stage companies. Most of the deals actually control and buy out. Think about the education market. I think China, first of all, it is a very large market. You have 20 million newborns every year. So think about K-12, it's about 200 million in size. And every year, there's 10 to 15 million people go to college. And then add on to that professional training. So for sure, this is a very big market and people willing to pay. Second, however, I do think China in general as a country is a very different paradigm, not only for education, for all the sectors that we invest. When you compare investing in China versus investing in more mature market, you're facing a whole lot of different issues, including sometimes government regulations, even sometimes political agenda. Also, the management teams may not be as professional sufficient as you wish. The benches need to be developed. Then you look at the financials, you definitely need to dig in to make sure all the governance and financials and how the board functions well in China. So in this different paradigm, you cannot just shift a business model which proven mature in other markets and just move to China. Even for investment, when you look at the criteria, it will be different. The third thing I also wanted to talk about is the so-called the business model and sustainability in the education space. For sure, as I mentioned, China education market is very large. Not only just the number of people, also the money they are willing to pay. However, I would say through early education all the way to college to professional training, I still feel there it's very hard to say there are a lot of proven sustainable business models for investment. The reasons being this is still a very new market. As I mentioned, most dominated by the so-called public education sectors. The private sectors only open for a number of years. Some may be a little bit longer. However, how do you really prove that the business model works is a big issue. So I wanted just to compare scale versus sustainable. It's not hard to build a scale business in education in China, given there's just so many people, their lack of content, lack of really good quality services. However, scale doesn't mean, or maybe I throw the question out, if you have a scaled education platform, does it mean it will be a successful business? From my investment perspective, that's a very big question. So I do think, very big market, very attractive. However, China is a different paradigm, and business model need to be really careful whether that business model will be sustained in the investment horizon.
If you don't mind, can we get a bit more specific, given those concerns? How did you approach the Rise Education investment, and how have you grown it?
Yeah, for us, we're very lucky to invest in Rise Education. In fact, earlier, Gymboree as well. Our approach is really to think about not just the big picture. For example, I mentioned that the market size, parents' willingness to pay. Really focus on the value proposition, what exactly we deliver to our kids and our parents, and how we are differentiated versus other education business. The third thing is really, once we invested, we spend a lot of time to improve the business. We view it as a business rather than just education. Interesting enough is a lot of people are good educators. They're not necessarily a good business person, or they have a lot of money to throw, but they are not yet a good educator. So you need to combine those. Rise Education, for example, first thing first, it is a very good curriculum. It has the sustainability from years 3 to 18. So you can keep your kids longer in the system. That really makes sense when you acquire customers. You have a better lifetime of value. Then it is offline plus online. So for offline, it's really service, right? Also, in some ways, retail services. That's why we have people coming in who has very a strong retail service credential to manage that business. The box economics need to work, and the real estate strategy need to work, and then how to make the scale, economy work. All those are really deep management and business expertise. So for us, it's not just better on a single idea, not just better on the content. It is a value chain that you need to build through the multiple years.
A lot of managers don't understand the complexity of the geographic differences in China. LiHong, could you explain a little bit about how your team and the Rise management team approached geographic expansion? I know the firm began its roots in Beijing, but how did it attack the other regional cities and beyond?
Right. I think people always say China is not just one China. You look at the different province, different tier cities, they're vastly different. Therefore, you do need what we call a headquarter of people with the genes of this business, and then you have local team. This is also how Bain Capital worked. Therefore, you do have to have local experts. I mentioned the real estate strategy, for example. In US, it's very easy. All the there are not many commercial property developers anyway, so it's kind of unified. You don't have to negotiate with hundreds of different developers. In China, that's exactly the opposite. Therefore, you do need to have a good strategy on the real estate side if you do offline. Even say you do online, there's still parents looking for different things, different kind of services in different regions. So the so-called the after-sales services is always a big challenge in China, whether it's education, whether it's industrial product, whether it's consumer product. So I think we have the so-called the depths of the team to cover different regions. Give a very quick example. Shanghai and Beijing, they're all tier 1 city, and people feel they're the same. However, they're very, very different in terms of parents' thinking. Beijing, I think it's more northern. People are more direct. If you have the criteria correct, they will say, I will sign on. In Shanghai, they may come, again, and the third time and the fourth time, even though they already know the criteria, and they compare all kinds of services, and they also want a soft touch because they are southerners. So all these actually created challenges for what type of salespeople you have, what kind of teacher you wanted to recruit, what type of management team you need to have. So I do think you need to be, even in China, you need to be fairly local. It doesn't mean just one China.
Yeah, maybe just chip in there, right? Just throw the technology perspective in there. For those that actually understand China, there's a lot of traffic, even as mainly offline education institution. A lot of our traffic actually come from online, come from our search-based optimization and search-based marketing. So that market is actually quite localized, right? So if you actually, for example, invest in a keyword, that keyword applies to a particular city. It does not apply to the whole China, right? So that is actually quite important to understand. But also, I guess, I can see the trend of more location-based service. If you actually use what in China we call the Koubei, is effectively word of mouth on internet. So that sort of reputation-driven marketing or traffic acquisition has been proved as very effective, but that is very much location-based, right? It's not even city-based. It's actually probably a radius of 5 kilometers of your center. So that is something that you just need to invest quite a lot, but also be aware that you have a limited radius that you have influence on. So just to add on to LiHong's point.
Zheng, can you kind of talk about Gymboree and your company's strategy? I think you were started out in Guangzhou region or Shenzhen. I can't remember. Tell us a little bit about the company and what you're doing.
Gymboree, many of you probably know. Gymboree is actually a U.S. brand founded in 1976. And Gymboree, a lot of parents 20 years ago, they enjoy playing with kids in Gymboree playgrounds. And it has been introduced to China 15 years ago. And currently, there's over 400 centers in China. In US, still, there's about 160 centers. And outside of US and China, there's about, we are in over 30 countries over the world. And it serves kids and parents from 0 to 5, basically to help them to, learning through play. So that's the philosophy. However, recently, we identified a very interesting phenomenon. In US, there's a lot of moms actually, they need to work full-time. They don't necessarily have the time to come together to the centers with the kids. They tend to choose the drop-off program, which is daycare or preschool, currently in US. So we see the trend. And in China, actually, the opposite. The parents, they actually spend a lot of time to work, and then recently they know how important to be a true parent. So they spend a lot of time during the weekends to accompany children to the centers. So we see the opposite in 2 different markets. And also, when we think about the education for the young child, it's not just for the child itself, actually including parents. The parents become a very important influencer to the family education. And how to, it's not a kind of 45 minutes lesson or classes. It should be continuous education and learning and practice when they come back to home. So how can we use technology and multimedia to still help them to practice with their kids? So that's a very, very interesting topic for us. And also how to bring in the families from America and also China and also around the globe That would be quite a lot of fun. Yeah, if they can experience the global citizen culture very early on.
Actually, I don't understand this. Can you explain a little bit about how Gymboree brings technology into its classrooms?
Gymboree currently, we focus more on how to improve the efficiency in operating. Gymboree is a classes require a lot of intervention from the teachers, and because the kids is very small, they climb, they cry, and they smile, and actually they need a lot of touch rather than or look at the pad, look at the mobile. So we use a lot of teachers' interactions, and invite the parents to interact with the kids. And then for the parents, they need to see more contents when they go back to home. So how to use technology, how to use multimedia contents to actually influence the parents, that's the goal for us. Yeah.
Is there any, at this age, probably too young, but are there any assessment tools that you attempt to do, or is it more about reporting to the parents and engaging the parents both inside and outside the classroom?
Yeah, we haven't identified a very, very effective method, honestly. And this is not because technology or contents, this is more because the habits from parents. They like to work on WeChat for 6 hours a day, but for them, how to spend time with the kids and how to make them, they spend time and keep spending time. That's the really big question. Because during the recent observation, the parents, they know the importance of to be with the kids, and they want to spend about 1 or 2 hours during the weekends. But how to persist, how to continue the behavior for 1 month or 3 months? Not necessarily they can persist like that way. So how to make it fun and easy to access, that will be very important. How to design the user experience, that's the challenge.
Right, and we're at an Edtech conference. Do you have an opinion on how Edtech should affect each age group? Again, you're dealing with 0 to 5. Rise Education extends it from 3 to 18. Your thoughts on the different companies that are existing in the market right now and your response to it?
Yeah, particularly as a education company focused on the early age child, I would say Edtech, we hope they can engage the parents much more efficiently to make them they feel happy to interact with the kids. So that's one. And the second is we hope the Edtech can help our teachers to be more effective. They can spend more time, more valuable time to interact with kids and the parents rather than managing their daily work. So we use Edtech to save their time. And the third is for the kids when they grow up, when they move into age of 3 and above, hopefully they will be able to access to some appropriate technology and tools to actually open the world to entire technology and to understand the world, use it in an appropriate way. Yeah. So that's the 3 aspects.
Great. So Alex, you came from a technology background. I think you worked at Cathay Pacific on products and mobilizing their platforms. Now one of your projects is Rise Education and taking a blended learning model and moving it more and more onto an O2O model. What are the sort of aspects that you were trying to concentrate on with Rise? Yeah,
thanks for that. So for Rise, I think I always call this a journey, right? So I think before I answer that question, I think there's actually a quite big belief that we as the technologists in Rise all believe that technology actually has a number of ways to apply to add value to education. It's not just delivery. It's not just the offline to online channel. It's not just efficiency. It's actually a blend of things. The importance is always to sort of sit back and look at the business model and understand how technology can add value across the whole value chain. Right? So if I just use that as a lens to look at a business, so really I think 3 things that we are currently pioneering in the technology evolution journey for Rise. Number 1 is is something that is very closely connected with our fundamental education value. It's called immersive learning, right? So RISE is is something actually we feel very proud of. It's something that we've been doing in the past 11 years is immersive learning. But in this context with more technology embedded into there, we still have our traditional offline classroom setup, which it's actually pretty strong. But we're also adding the online element into it, which is I call it as online learning, online delivery. We are adding an online one-on-one English tutoring product into our overall product mix. So that is a very strong supplement to our offline setup. But what we believe is there is this organic connection between the offline and the online product. So our students can actually enjoy both, and they can sort of connect the two experiences together to have a better learning result. That's number one. Number two is what we call as a community. So we are a big believer in saying that studying or learning is not just the responsibility of the students, especially at this younger age. It's actually really the responsibilities of all stakeholders in this, students, teachers, and parents. So how do we actually connect them seamlessly together into a community? We've been actually using technology to create that virtual community, especially for parents, so that we have this thing called homeschool. It's effectively a tool that help connect the parents with the teachers, so they actually understand where the students are, especially their learning curve and progress. And number three, which is something that I think in most cases missed by people, is what we call the consistent teaching and consistent learning experience. Right? If you build it down to technology, it's really what I call as a backbone technology that actually support all the products that can actually grow out from this backbone. So that is about quite consistently how do you do marketing, how do you do sales, how do you do teaching, how do you do straightforward things like classroom assignment, teacher assignment, students assignment, all those things. There are actually a lot of similarities across the board for different products. So how to conceptualize that into a platform that can be utilized across the board for different products is something that we actually spend a lot of effort in.
So it seems like there is a theme between your two comments of the technology really has to bring closer engagement between the parent, the student, and the institution, right? Because the parent is tracking progress pretty closely.
That's right. And I think, for now, we are basically dealing with a new generation of parents as well,
Okay.
which are obviously, much more technology savvy, and they naturally feel comfortable to use different platforms and different terminals or different endpoints, what we call. So, I think even for their requirements to engage with our parents better as our customers and our clients, it's important that we actually move along this digital journey as well.
See, I'm actually going to try to contradict you as a devil's advocate for a moment. I'm an educator. We have platforms within the Edge's product lines. I find it quite difficult to get parents to open an email, let alone open a CRM or an LMS. So, they're currently just devoted to WeChat and the reports that Jung Yu was saying. So, how do we get that engagement?
Well, that's a very good question. It's also a somewhat difficult question. I think I would actually take a different view at this. My view is we're really we're not trying to convince them to use the technology. In a way, we're actually I used the wrong word, but competing with WeChat. WeChat is almost something that is too easy to use, right? But the problem is you don't have a very strong data ownership with WeChat. It is a platform that is owned by Tencent, and they have their architecture in place, so you sort of have to play with it. Our view is, it's very important that we have the community connected with the learning result, right? So you mentioned CRM, LMS is our traditional way to call things, but I think the important thing is when the parents use this platform, they don't just talk to each other. That doesn't give them too much of value. WeChat probably does that better. But integration with the learning so that you actually see how your kids are actually growing, that's something that is of inherited value to the parents. I think that is the key to increase the usage of the products.
Understood. Actually, in another summit talk, former president of Yale University, Rick Levin, and also former CEO of Coursera, mentioned that it's quite difficult for foreign firms to attempt to build relationships in China on the edtech side. And this is a president of Yale University who has deep ties in China. Coursera, one of the top sort of MOOC players, I guess you would call it, in the U.S. space coming in China. Adil, you run a marketing intelligence firm. You work with a lot of the major players here who are looking to come into China. What are the kind of questions that they're asking you about? What kind of research are you trying to bring to the table?
Sure. So depending on where an organization is in its investigation of the opportunity there, some of the organizations that we work with could be at a very early stage where they just want to understand what's the size of the opportunity, what are the segments that we might be able to target, et cetera. The ones that already have operations in China and are looking to sort of further grow into other areas of business might ask a different set of questions. But I think overall, the kind of questions that are worth asking are, what do we bring to the table that's additive? What can we contribute that doesn't already exist in a more local, easy to accept manner already? As a foreign organization, where can we be competitive? I think that's important. For example, if we talk about a US math curriculum, it isn't perceived as being particularly competitive in the China market, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's hard to communicate that
Right.
to an organization that may believe that they have a very strong product for the US market. But in fact, in China, it wouldn't actually go that far. So for the most part, I think many of the companies that we work with that are US-based and are looking at the China opportunity, in some way or form, it often comes down to English language learning or assessments as a more obvious way to consider an opportunity. Okay. And then there obviously are opportunities for platform plays as well, where it's a pure edtech play, not a content play.
Can you give us some examples of one of the three spaces, either the ELT market or the assessment market, or as you said, the platform market that's trying to come in and
Sure. Well, I mean, for the assessment market, I think as you're aware, through your association with the SSAT, so we've got all kinds of players like the College Board, ETS, ACT, others that are actively looking at and do business in China to varying degrees. A lot of that is driven by the Chinese study abroad market as well. So the numbers of Chinese students who are planning to proceed to the US or other English-speaking destination countries, a lot of the English learning and the assessments that are offered by those kind of companies are with an eye towards capturing that segment of the market. It's an attractive segment of the market, but I would argue that's a relatively small segment of the market numerically compared to the population that is perhaps interested in learning English but may not eventually go overseas for higher education.
Okay, so you're saying that the pure overseas market is smaller and
right,
more difficult to expand?
Well, it's just that you have about 300,000 students going overseas every year. Right. That's still a relatively small segment of the population compared to the overall number of K-12 learners or potentially higher education learners. So I think one of the things that we're looking at for some of our clients is what's the opportunity for those kinds of products and services for working adults, to skill-based learning as well as workforce assessments. Those are some of the areas that we're looking at for some organizations.
LiHong, can you comment a little bit on that too? What are, Adil just mentioned industries that other, I guess, strategics are coming in and looking for investment or expansion opportunities. What do you see are the main themes for the next couple of years?
I think I mentioned the market from early education all the way to career professional training. In my mind, it's all very interesting and attractive. But I also mentioned whether you can find scaled business or sustainable business model is a key issue. So for my focus, I still think the so-called pre-K.
Okay.
You know, that's a very big market, whether it's kindergarten, maybe less so today, given the government regulation. But early education, like Gymboree does, is actually still very, very important and attractive. The other thing I have to say, Chinese parents are so focused on, scores and degrees and get to college. So all the training for the K-12, that's kind of a market you cannot avoid or escape. Therefore, still a lot of the opportunities are there. K9, is not something that I think people should very much focus on, because government really wanted to, encourage the official curriculum. And then the high school, however, start to emerge as a very attractive sector, because not everyone can go to universities in China. Also not many people can go abroad. Therefore, the high school curriculum actually start to divert, meaning it doesn't have to compile the official guidance. So you see a lot of private high school emerge. And as long as they have good training, good kind of a pathway to something, I think that's a sector will attract a lot of students, parents, and investors. College, as I mentioned, when you think about the college in the early days, it's not about education; it's about real estate. Meaning, the reason they get to college, private college, because they can get a land subsidized by the government, and then surrounded that you build real estate to sell. So early days, the private college are not education per se. I think today the declining population and kind of flattish enrollment also make the private college tough to grow. The professional training everywhere, it's a huge demand. However, I do think China hasn't really figured out a sensible business model. Therefore, you look at all kinds of professional training, I feel it's still very tough to find good targets.
When you're talking about sort of the high school space and the K-9 space, I guess my question would be, what are Chinese companies looking for in looking for resources abroad? There's definitely U.S. firms trying to invest into China or trying to monetize in China. But what are the kind of resources? You look at VIP Kid looking for foreign teachers abroad. What are Chinese companies looking for? Anyone can answer this if you have a view. John Yu?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can take a stab.
Sorry.
Probably Adil. Go first.
Adil first.
Sure. So I think from my experience, high quality content is something that Chinese companies are looking for. And if they can get it outside of China, I think they're quite open to that idea. The other is, I think, brand cachet. So being associated with a brand that can somehow be packaged and marketed really well in China, even if the content will be very localized and quite different from what's offered overseas. So you see that in all kinds of business models. You see that with private international schools, with the associations with Dulwich and Wellington and so forth.
Right.
You see that with other organizations as well that can claim to have some kind of association or tie-up with a well-known brand outside. And I think in fact, Gymboree might be an example of that perhaps as well in terms of its acceptance initially into the Chinese market, but I'm sure.
Yeah, Zhengyu, please comment.
Yeah. Probably take a internal view from like Gymboree. We organize like this one. So in United States, our resource is more focused on the brand building and the content development. Basically because, as Adil said, the contents from, how to actually build a content appropriate for kids and also attractive to parents. I still think like those big companies, no matter Pearson, HMH, have a lot of experience. So that actually brand building and the content development will be very important to a education firm in China. And China actually we focus more on like how to deliver the quality teaching and learning results more efficiently. Right. And when LiHong said, how to deliver the teaching and learning experience in China actually vary by different areas, cities, and actually, people as a very important factor to deliver the learning. So we hope like we can have more technology to help the teacher to be more efficient and to be more consistent. So on China side, it's more like scale, repeatability, and on American side, we hope like we can bring in more brand equity and content equity.
It's funny for I was a former Kaplan guy and Princeton Review guy, and I, working to build test preparation in China, it was a sort of eye-opening experience for me. The level of, we had sort of theory and values that I tried to espouse from what I call Western test prep. But when I went to Asian test prep, I said, it's a whole different world, and I'm going to have to find a sort of a mixed solution to make it work. And you can't just take that black box that you did outside and you toss it into a black box in China and kind of hope it works. I think, Zhengyu, you make a really good point, which is that you really have to think about the operational elements, right? The teachers, how to get teachers motivated to teach your content. Another issue that we faced was, should we use foreign teachers? Should we use local teachers? Why are we making that decision? Do you want to maybe LiHong kind of talk about RISE in that aspect? Because I think RISE has made a unique choice of empowering local teachers to teach ELT.
RISE use HMH curriculum.
Courseware, yeah.
But the team actually spent a lot of time to localize it, make it suitable for China market, make it suitable for the teachers in China to deliver. Also, of course, make it suitable for the ages in China. I think if you look around, that kind of a success is not widely spread, I would say. You encounter the issues. I agree on the brand and the content, but I think a lot of times when you think about what kind of a content people want from developed country, for example, still very much associated with maybe English language type of content rather than say math. Now people think about science, right? STEM, coding. Those I think yes, I agree. Those contents are quite important everywhere, not just in the US. Also, you can get it in China. However, to get the content really become a teachable class is a different thing. That's hopefully, it's also not just about technology. It's really about the culture, the mindset. I think Zhengyu mentioned a little bit, the Chinese parents, I think they struggle with two things. One is very narrow-minded, meaning they need to send their kids to good college. Therefore, everything associated with the official system, the examining system, they have to battle through sometimes even primary school, and then middle school, and then high school, then university. So how they allocate their kids' time becomes an issue. So they know that you may need to build the capability for the future. However, they need their kids really spend time to make the test scores. So that's one struggle. The other struggle is really they know that a lot of contents in the Western world are very good. However, if that doesn't help the scores in the China system, they at some point will cut off. It's just where they allocate time rather than money. So I do think these dynamic exists. The third element at today's breakfast panel, people talk about education in the West also involve independence, involve sometimes citizenship, involve democracy, for example, emotions. I do agree that in China those things are not emphasized. In some way, intentionally not emphasized. Therefore, the content, you gotta also be sensitive. If the content's associated with some of those elements, even it's good, it doesn't mean that it has a market.
That's actually interesting because I think there was a couple companies that were pushing debate, like Harvard debate, right. and such, and they asked me and it's doing well in China, sort of, and they asked me, is this a good product? And I said, well, it's a bit of a controversial product to have a bunch of high school kids debating in English about different topics, right? So I think that creates an investment challenge there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would add to that I think the perception of what's a nice to have versus a must have product is also evolving in China. It's so the must-have used to be very much focused around hard skill acquisition and passing exams and what will help in getting a good score on the Gaokao. But in the work that we've done, we've seen a shift in parents' perception of what must-have is, and some of the soft skill development and things that don't necessarily contribute directly to test scores are also becoming, in certain segments of the customer base, are becoming things that are being emphasized more. So I see that potentially as a longer term opportunity. Probably courses on democracy and so forth will not be very popular, but there might be various other opportunities in that space.
Yeah, that I definitely agree. That's also the philosophy that both Gymboree and Rise Education have. However, I think we try to blend it into the China system. So, at the same time, you have so-called the hard skills that you try to acquire and develop. Then you blend it with communication, leadership, project-based learning, and also learn from play. So I hope companies like us will make this market more towards suitable for the future, rather than just suitable for the test prep.
Can I ask? I guess, again, I come from the world of college prep, getting into good schools overseas, and sort of the requirements of that, which are good test scores, good grades, and for the Americans, good extracurricular activities. We have a panel here of multi-generational parents. I mean, what are your views? Because I have encountered, old style parenting advice, and then now new style parent advice. Jung Yu or Alex, what are your thoughts if you have kids and thinking about raising them well?
Well, that could be a hypothetical question. because I think the challenge is you always want to do something, while in the end you sort of get peer pressure and you end up doing something that's quite different, right? So that's why I call it a hypothetical thing. But I have two kids, 4 and 6. I think at this stage, whereas they're still relatively young, I have the freedom to think, right? to imagine. But I think if I fast forward to 18 years old, would I want them to be in a good college, a good university in US? I I would probably definitely say yes, right? So I think, I completely agree with LiHong's view that, you almost have that ticking point when your parents' instinct sort of kicks in and saying, I do need to get my kids more focused on academics, right? I think for 6 years old, probably not quite there yet, but I would think, probably getting to 9 to 12 years old, that ticking point would actually come. That's just, unfortunately, I think the case for most of the Asian parents.
So my girls were born in China and raised in China. And my wife and I are both involved in the education space, but we, even as an expat family living in China, we couldn't help but be influenced by what we saw around us, which was that parents were incredibly driven to help their children in every aspect of their development in a much more hands-on manner than what we were familiar with in other countries.
Yeah, hands-on seems to be a theme here, right? Or pressured, or very well led. Zheng, you had a...
I want to share with you a very interesting, we just launched a new framework, new educational philosophy called 3S. 3S, first S stands for sweet, social and emotional development for kids. And the second S stands for strong, physical, healthy. And the third S stands for smart and cognitive development. And actually, we have quite a lot of debates internally and externally how we're going to sequence the 3S. Should we have first smart, or strong, or sweet? And eventually, the internal polls and also the external feedback says, for the 0 to 5, it's so important to put the sweet as the first priority. To have a very good character and social emotional development is so important. And then talk about strong, to have a very physical, healthy physical platform to build more learning. And then move to smart. And smart is not just to acquire the knowledge, it's actually the curiosity and the capability to acquire the knowledge. So that's kind of 3S framework and accepted in China and also in US. So hopefully this will be the one I do think young generation, they really like to focus more on the sweet and strong rather than smart. Yeah.
Right. If you don't mind, before we open it up to further questions, I had a question which was, in terms of, again, back to Ed and EdTech investments, there are strategic exits, there are public exits, and there are private exits. LiHong, Alex, what do you think is the trend right now? Obviously, I believe Rise chose the and Bain Capital chose the IPO route. Others look at trade sales. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's how to say it. It's you want to combine the strategic vision and the so-called the shareholder value issue together sometimes. Sorry, you want to keep them together, not sometimes. Because I'm a private equity investor, I would characterize us as a mid to long term, maybe midterm investors or shareholders.
So is that 5 to 7 years typically?
Yeah, 5 to 7 years, sometimes stretch to 10, 12 years. However, we are not a strategic, so-called the permanent shareholder. So when we look at the exit, the first thing come in my mind is whoever buys this business, whether we're taking public or sell to strategic or the next fund, I hope that the shareholders or the next shareholders have the same kind of philosophy and creating value and keep the business going. the rise education, for example, we feel we want to hold longer because we can continue help the company to create value. That's why we decided to take it public. Today we still own, Bain Capital still owns 73%. I think the ownership will continue for a number of years, and also hopefully with that number of years, Bain Capital together with management team can build the company into stronger, better educator, and also create a more shareholder value.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and open questions to the audience if anyone has anything. Or yeah.
I want to learn about expanding China. Like you started from several cities and you go to national business. Right now I work with about 8 public schools in Shandong and Hebei at a couple of districts here in the US. I hope it to be a national business. I want to learn from your experience.
Maybe that's an offline discussion.
Yeah, it seems like an offline discussion. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yep.
You made a reference a little bit earlier about some of the partnerships that have been created between some of the UK high schools and schools in China, kind of a hybrid model, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I think, that's been going on for 10, 12 years. I'm curious about the rate of success, if you could qualify that by the demand for those types of schools. I mean, are they considered highly desirable in China? And I'm also curious to know whether any other partnerships are being explored at this point, whether with schools in the US or other English-speaking countries.
Sure. So the ones that I'm familiar with have been relatively successful. In some markets, there may be a risk of saturation, especially if they're playing in the premium expat international market. But that can also be a very much based on sort of location in the city and things like that. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think there's still demand for that product. I'm not aware of any American brands that have managed to do that, actually, to be perfectly honest. There seems to be I believe people are working on it, but I can't think of any large-scale rollouts with an American branded school that have been successful so far. There have been obviously standalone schools that are quite successful.
I know there's a huge demand for Chinese students to attend, U.S. boarding schools or U.S. high schools. And I was wondering whether these kinds of partnerships could actually be a way to address the demand which can be met, by sending just a very small number of students abroad.
Sure. So pathway programs are actually a very popular and growing area of business, which basically takes students from China into a kind of stream that eventually gets them either into a U.S. high school or into a U.S. university. And those are often structured with the cooperation of a U.S. or U.K. provider that puts that pathway program together. So in the U.K., you've got organizations like Cambridge Education Group that are doing quite well. In fact, they have assets in the U.S. as well. But onshore in China, I'm not sure if the U.S. brands have been that successful.
I think more international content has been successful. So there's a lot of what I call local international high schools who are using IB curriculum or AP curriculum as a backbone. It seems like the UK brands are more receptive to wholesale licensing their brand to the China market. I think another struggle is frankly the HR issues. Right, now we're sort of brain draining international teacher talent into China. One, how good are they teaching Chinese kids? Two is how long will they stay? Before it becomes another 2-year stint off to Saudi Arabia, to India, to et cetera. And so there's not enough permanence to build a quality institution. So those are the challenges in that market. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about an incubator or accelerator. First, I want to thank you for this very insightful conversation. Sounds like there's a party next door and they're missing out on the good content of this session.
We got 4 minutes.
I work for a global nonprofit and we want everybody to be a global citizen. And so we have an Edtech product, blended learning, immersive learning around global competence building. And I'm wondering to what extent can we learn from maybe your expertise around how can we approach it in the Chinese market. One Belt, One Road is looking at expanding to other countries as well. So I think some global competence learning is necessary. So to what extent is there support for a product or a young idea to develop in the Chinese market through an incubator, accelerator, et cetera?
Thoughts? I would say that there are incubators. I believe TAL is sort of doing an incubator process within their network. I know the VC community, we don't have a person up here in the VC community, but I know my friends in the VC community are quite active in doing incubators. I think you'll have to speak to organizations like Rise Asia and Edtech Asia as sources of financing or incubating in this space.
There are accelerators that, in a way, specialize working with foreign companies that are trying to make it in China. So China accelerators, I think one of them.
Yeah.
In Beijing and Shanghai, there are a few like that.
I think it's a bit of a hard space in EdTech to do that because of the licensing issues and again, the translation, quote unquote, issues. So if you don't have an incredibly mature product already, to attempt to bring that into the China market on your own or even with a Chinese product would be, I think, incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I guess the other thing to note is there are an increasing number of players in the China market, homegrown ones, right? And since this market is obviously pretty hot at this point, there are a lot of new players coming in that probably have more of an internet and technology background coming into the EdTech space. So I think it's probably also important to understand what are the products or companies that are already there in the market space so that you don't duplicate, with something that's already homegrown as very strong.
And I think also that's a really good point. But also, you really have to ask yourself: does your product have value in the Chinese market? Right? As Adil sort of mentioned, a lot of players come in being already experts in their own geographies and saying our product works really, really well in these geographies. Clearly, it would work in a great market like China, and sometimes clearly it would not work in a great market like China, and you have to kind of understand that before you make that big investment. Right. Great, thank you so much for attending and bringing your comments to the table. Should anyone have any more questions, please come up and after. Thank you.